Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Sorang, and joining me here in the studio today is our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
The World Health Organization has officially designated video game addiction as a mental illness, sparking fierce debate in the medical community, the gaming world, and even among government officials. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to take a closer look at the WHO's latest decision and discuss its ramifications as well as possible solutions. On May 25th local time in Switzerland, the World Health Organization adopted a revision to its disease classification system, which includes gaming disorder as a recognized disease. The new classifications will come into effect on January 1st, 2022, but South Korea could be afforded an extended grace period lasting until 2026. The WHO ruled that a gaming disorder can be diagnosed if a person's behavioral pattern associated with video games is severe enough to seriously impair the important areas of functioning in his or her life. So first, let's start with personal opinions. What are your overall thoughts on the WHO's latest ruling?
You know, I'm not against it. I'm generally for it. And the reason is I feel like the criteria to define gaming disorder is pretty extreme. So in most cases, I would think the average gamer isn't going to meet it. You know, it has to interrupt your daily activities, such as work, your relationships, for over a year. So you're talking about really an intense amount of gaming. With that said, I am a little skeptical just because I feel like the visceral reaction from the public might be, you know, to take away their kids' PlayStations or whatever it may be, when in reality we're talking about a really small portion of people who play video games, right?
So it was a very narrow definition, but it could lead to some moral panic among the public.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the World Health Organization hasn't really done much to get out what exactly their definition of it is. You know, they only have basically one short page about it. And so I feel like from here on, there needs to be a lot of awareness campaigning to really make sure that parents and adults understand what a gaming disorder really looks like.
Right, each country will have to figure that out for itself. Fabian?
Well, about that specific aspect, I'm not so worried, but I think this is a classic case of overregulation. If we look at the World Health Organization's classification of disease, the catalog, it includes almost 55,000 diseases. You know, we got gaming addiction, simultaneously also sex addiction was included, and probably in the next update of the catalog there will be like a social media addiction or whatever. But I think it's really overregulated because addiction or the gaming addiction is not the root of the problem. It's, there are like underlying problems behind it, let's say depression or like some kind of overcompensation of something. So I don't think it helps that you really diversify so-called like lifestyle diseases. Do you get what I mean? I think it's not necessary actually.
Not necessary, okay.
Yeah, I have a mixed feeling about the decision of WHO. Personally, I agreed with the decision of WHO in terms of raising the awareness to the addiction program. For example, in Japan, it is said that 930,000 students, junior high school students, high school students, are claiming to be addicted.
Self-diagnosed?
Yeah, I think so. But it is more than double compared with 5 years ago. Yeah. But as a reporter on economics, I'm a little bit worried about the damage to gaming industry.
All right. Okay, so just as we have mixed opinions on the panel, there have been mixed reactions to the WHO ruling in countries around the world. And some have raised questions on whether it'll be possible to take a leave of absence from work or receive an exemption from the military service on medical grounds if gaming addiction is indeed a health problem. Following the WHO's announcement, publicly listed video game companies have seen their stock prices fall over concerns that the WHO ruling could fuel negative public perceptions on video games themselves. So what's been the reaction like from Germany regarding this decision?
So in Germany, unfortunately, there was not a big public discourse. Of course, the health minister welcomed that decision, and the gaming industry was rather skeptical, but the media did not pick up on that story very prominently. So I think for most people, they don't even know that anything has changed.
Oh, okay, all right.
In the United States, I would say there's been a lot of media coverage, but I haven't seen a lot of backlash from gamers themselves, which I find interesting. I feel like this is not a new concept to the United States. And the other thing is, in the US, we usually go by the DSM-5.
Right.
And so far, the DSM-5 has not named this as a specific illness. So it's a little inconsequential in that sense, beyond the fact that we now have a major health organization in the world tracking this over time and collecting data.
Okay, and what about from Japan?
So there is no panic in Japan.
Okay.
So even though there are many gaming companies like Nintendo and Sony, so the Ministry of Health, it seems to be neutral.
Okay.
Yeah, it said that they will ask 9,000 students about how many hours you play games each day. So they try to find the reality, and after that, try to make a decision.
Okay. Now, one reason video games has gotten a bad rep from the public is because certain media outlets have portrayed video games as a negative influence driving criminal behavior. And of course, others have countered that there is no link whatsoever between video games and criminal behavior. So, what's your opinion on this purported relationship between playing violent games and violence in real life?
That's I will not use strong language here, but I think it's completely nonsense.
Nonsense. Okay.
And the reason is, I mean, there have been discussions whether, like, let's say, Hollywood blockbusters, action movies can trigger violence, gangster rap can trigger violence. I think it can maybe, lead to some behavior in some extreme cases, but you always have to have a predisposition, because there are millions of avid players of ego shooters, like first-person violent games, and even young children can differentiate between what is a game and what is reality, and it doesn't trigger any kind of violence. So, for example, if you find out, let's say, some shooter, like some murder happened and the perpetrator was an avid gamer of a violent game, then the media always draws that causal relation.
It becomes a headline.
But you cannot do that, because you don't know, like, did the person have some kind of trauma? Did he suffer from schizophrenia, etc.? There are so many factors leading to it, and video games, in the most extreme case, can be like a very small factor.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Fabian. There's really no research showing a really clear cause and effect relationship. In fact, there was a recent study from Oxford that shows that there really is no link there. But I will say this, I do feel like, having played video games a lot and seeing what's out there, that I can see that argument from the sense of, are we normalizing violence in these games? Yeah, Grand Theft Auto, which has been the source of controversy for years. I don't know if anyone's played the latest versions, but you can literally solicit sexual favors from women and then kill them before you have to pay them. I just think that, there are some greater questions that we can ask in this, and it's interesting that, the regulation in video games, for instance, in Grand Theft Auto has been, there's a part where you can drunk drive, and every time the character does it, he says, I shouldn't be doing this, but he doesn't say that when he's about to shoot a prostitute in the face. And so I think there are some greater moral questions that are happening about these games, and how they could potentially lead to the normalization of violence, and I do think those questions are valid,
But as Fabio mentioned, it's not exclusive to the gaming industry, right? It occurs in magazines, TV programs, films, and so on. Now, long before the WHO's decision of putting game addiction as a mental illness, there have been research conclusions suggesting that video games can indeed have adverse health effects. Do you think video games have the same seriousness as substance abuse, substance addiction, and gambling addiction?
Yeah, especially to teens, students who cannot control themselves, not only their minds and times and the schedule. So there should kind of guidance and teaching to teens, especially high school student and junior high school student. But it should not so same as drugs and alcohols. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. I think that the principle actually is the same. If you look at how addiction works, either with or without substances, it sets like dopamines in your chemical household in your brain free and gives you euphoria. And that can be caused by, let's say, in natural ways, when you're out in the sun or when you eat something, whatever. But for example, if you, let's say, smoke cigarettes all the time, then basically you set a lot of dopamine free and the household in your brain gets out of balance. And if you don't, you have to increase the dosage to get the same kind of effect. And if that doesn't happen, then you get withdrawal symptoms, and that could also lead to depression, etc. And in gaming, you also have a lot of effects that work the same. For example, in a violent game, if you shoot someone or if you win a game, then your brain signals you, also sets free the dopamines, and it's basically the same. Whether you smoke a cigarette, whether you eat chocolate, whether you go jogging, or you play a game, this principle is the same. Only for gaming, it's more like the rate of those dopamines is much higher and it's more intense.
Well, then you mentioned that there are other things like walking out in the sun. Should that be regulated?
No, of course not. But that's basically natural. But I mean, in an extreme case, we know from people who've been addicted to, let's say, to hard drugs, and when they become clean, they search for some way of compensating it, and that can, for example, be jogging or fitness. They become fitness junkies. That can also have negative effects. Of course, it's much more healthy than whether you would take hard drugs. But of course, you can also. I know people who run every marathon and don't even realize that they actually ruin their body, but they cannot stop because they are addicted to the adrenaline or the dopamine that it sets free.
The runner's high. According to a report from the Korea Creative Content Agency, games took up over 60% of South Korea's cultural content exports in 2018, far outweighing other categories such as films and music. As of 2017, the South Korean video game industry was worth a total of $11 billion and is still growing. Many analysts say that the country's gaming industry will inevitably face headwinds due to the WHO's latest ruling. And according to one particularly gloomy forecast, economic losses could amount to more than $9 billion over a 3-year period starting from 2023. Do you think the WHO's ruling could lead to a decline in the video gaming industry, aside from the esports industry?
Yeah, I think so. According to the government, so the market of gaming industry will shrink 1.1 trillion won from 2023 to 2025. Also, 20,000 people will lose their jobs. So already Korean gaming industries have a lot of benefit from Chinese market. But in China, there is strong regulation on gaming industry. So already Korean gaming industries have damaged. So plus these WHO decisions will give further damage to Korean gaming industries.
So further exacerbate the ongoing forces against the Korean gaming industry?
I think so.
Fabian, do you share that concern?
Well, I hope not. I know that actually the Korean gaming industry right now is in a quite tough position because China is really overtaking a lot. The investments that are done in China and to some extent also in the United States are huge. And at some point, I think the Korean gaming industry will have to kind of specify more to find a niche because against those two big markets, it's really hard to compete. And having said that, I mean, they were the pioneers. So I think they might lose that position actually in the future. But I hope not because of the WHO ruling.
Okay.
You know, I'm a little skeptical of how much the WHO ruling is going to really affect the industry in the long term. We have seen a dip in the market, and there are all of these projections, but I do think right now it's a little bit of a panic, a little bit of a moral panic, and I just question how seriously people are going to take the WHO decision. You know what I mean? It's at the end of the day, it's an extraneous health organization. It's not necessarily affecting whether or not mothers buy their daughters and sons video games for their birthday, or whether or not teenagers are going to, get consoles with their first part-time job. These kind of things. So I feel like while we talk to video game experts, there's a concern. I don't know how much the consumer is really all that concerned right now.
Okay.
Well, actually, I think the gaming industry or like the gaming culture, I would say, was a driving force also for the development of South Korea as a digital powerhouse because the PC bank culture when it spread and the people wanted to play competitively. So of course you need a lot of fast broadband connections for that. Or for example, why did the gaming culture establish here so strongly? Interestingly, in terms of video consoles, South Korea is rather a weak market,
right.
And I think one of the reasons is the concerned parents or mothers who buy their children something to play. They didn't buy them video consoles because that's only affiliated with entertainment, with basically killing time or just playing. But computers are affiliated with also learning, education, and
right.
Also following the trend.
Now, if we have a look at the size of the global gaming industry, as of last year, it was worth a total of $130 billion, having grown 11% on year. According to market research conducted in the US, South Korea is the world's fourth largest gaming market in terms of total revenue. Do you think South Koreans on average play more games compared to people in other countries?
In terms of how much they play games, I don't know. But in terms of, looking at the population, it's actually on par with the United States from my understanding. So I saw recently that a survey showed that about 7 in 10 South Koreans play games, whether that be on their computer or mobile or console. And in the United States, it's around the same. It's around 7 out of 10 Americans, or more in the 60 percentile area. So I don't know about that. I mean, it seems like, perhaps when people game in South Korea, they game a little more hardcore, maybe. But it seems like in terms of the population, it's about right about the same. Yeah.
Okay, so the proportion's similar. Well, what about compared to Japan?
Yeah, hard to say. If you go to Japan, you can find Wii of Nintendo and PlayStation of Sony. So every 2 families or every 3 families. So many Japanese are enjoying playing games. It is one of the culture among Japanese people. So I can't compare with Japanese and Korean
culture.
But I think I feel more enthusiasm here in Korea than Japan.
Okay, for video games?
Yeah, because of esports.
Because of esports, all right.
Well, interesting that you mentioned it. I recently checked a survey from 2018 asking participants how many hours every week do you play video games.
To self-report?
Yeah, to self-report. And I checked on all the countries that we represent, and guess who's first?
Japan?
No, it's actually the United States, followed by Germany, followed by Japan, and South Korea is actually last.
Right.
Even though the gaming industry is super important here, and gaming is also, as we will talk about later, like a professional sport discipline, but people are also incredibly busy. I think the average Korean maybe doesn't have too much time and too much free time to maybe play too much.
To allocate it to gameplay, right. Now, in Japan, 3 out of the world's 10 largest video game companies in the world are based in Japan. And Japan is very well known for having created some of the most iconic and influential video games in history. How did Japan's gaming industry become so explosive?
I think they are very good at making hardware and software. In terms of hardware, so they are very famous companies like Nintendo and Sony. Also, so many softwares who are supporting, by providing good content to hardware companies. So, but after 2000, so the market is changing from, console-centric gaming to more online and PC-centric gaming. So Japanese companies could not, react to the change properly.
Right.
So now Korean companies are doing very well, based on PC and online.
Have there been any regulations that have either prevented or slowed down the development of the gaming industry in Japan, or have benefited it by boosting it, by giving it some revenue?
I think no regulation from the government. But as I said to you before, so many students are claiming to be addicted to playing games. So it is a very social problem, and the parents and the teachers are worrying about their future. So now discussion will be heated.
How have the video game company representatives in Japan reacted to the WHO?
So according to the Kyodo Newswire, So the CEO of Sony said that, oh, we will take it seriously and we will make countermeasure to the issue of addiction. So everything will start from now.
Okay. Now, in other countries, video game industry representatives, including the US, Canada, Australia, and South Korea, they have protested against the WHO's latest decision. And some gaming companies have released individual statements to vocalize their stance on the issue. How have the gaming industry and people inside them reacted to the news of the WHO's decision?
From what I know, of course, they're skeptical, they don't like the decision, but their voices were not as loud, or at least the media didn't cover those voices very much. So there was not an outcry, no paranoia that sales would go down massively. I think part of the reason is also because that decision was basically de facto already announced in 2018, and now the catalog of disease classification was just updated. So actually the industry already had a lot of time to anticipate that decision.
Okay. So it was not a surprise to them.
In the US, the Entertainment Software Association, which is probably one of the biggest coalitions of video game companies, they have railed against it, mostly just saying that there needs to be more research on the subject. I think that's generally true, but I'm always skeptical when video game industries or coalitions, rail against these things, just because of course they will, right? That's their bread and butter, that's their livelihood. Video games in the US are a $44 billion industry. Like, there's a lot of money to lose there, and so why would they have any incentive to come out and say, yeah, you're right, there are people addicted and this is a problem?
Back in 2013, the South Korean parliament floated the idea of adopting a game addiction tax to pay for the social costs of video game addiction. And there have been rumors that this so-called game addiction tax could be brought up once more following the latest WHO ruling. The Health Ministry, however, has denied such speculation. What do you think about the gaming addiction tax? Good idea? Or not really?
That's basically the most extreme measure you can take. I would say no, at that point it's totally exaggerated if you would implement a tax. Most people who are actually vulnerable to get addicted to gaming are young people, and I think the first responsibility is actually at the parents. I think there should be more awareness. There should be also opportunities to educate people about the dangers of gaming, for sure. But I don't think it's the gaming industry's task to pay a tax, because 95%, 98%, maybe even 99% of the gamers are just doing all right.
But you mentioned, before you said that if you look at MRIs and brain images, basically the same area fires up, whether it's alcohol, substance, or gambling addiction. There is a tax base put up on those things, so why not games?
Well, okay, for example, with alcohol you have, let's say, a percentage of 5% who cannot handle alcohol and then develop an addiction. It's a rough guess. For gaming it will be way less. And I think, it's also a culture, not only an industry, it's also a culture value. So, I wouldn't rule out the possibility to set a tax, but I think it should be really the last measure. And at that point it's not necessary. Okay,
now the gaming tax, so that is out of the question for the time being. But so let's have a look at what the South Korean government has done. They have taken many preventative measures over the years aimed at tackling gaming addiction, such as the shutdown law and regulations on randomized in-game items. So if the government were to intervene further in terms of preventing gaming addictions, what might be some appropriate measures to go about it?
Yeah, I want to make a proposal that beverage company is promoting some kind of class in which people can enjoy wine and alcohol. So they are teaching how to enjoy alcohol, even though there is addiction, right?
The risk of developing addiction.
That's right. So this theory can be applied to gaming companies. So in the cooperation with the government, they can promote some kind of classes through which they can learn how to enjoy gaming. So how to enjoy playing game healthily. In order to deepening the bond between parents and the children and among friends. So I want to make a proposal of this kind of class.
Some sort of class to foster playing games as part of a healthy and normal lifestyle.
That's right, yes.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Thank you
you.
for your insight. The WHO's decision to categorize gaming addiction as a mental illness has had ripple effects in the medical and gaming communities, as well as in the realms of education and economy. Regardless of where you stand in the debate, it's our hope that the WHO's latest ruling will spark constructive debate and eventually lead to better access to care for those who require it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.